400 stanzas. On the Middle Way. With commentary by Gyel-tsap. Chapter 6. Abandoning disturbing emotions. Since the source of all trouble lies in cyclic existence, which is caused by contaminated actions and disturbing emotions, Bodhisattvas who act as close friends to transmigrators encourage trainees to put an end to such actions and emotions. Assertion: if that is so, it is unreasonable to give the ordained buildings 500 masonry courses high and food of 100 flavors. Since these are pleasurable, they increase desire. From the outset, one should therefore avoid things like visual form that arouse desire. Those who undergo overt suffering by mortifying their bodies with heat and cold, letting their hair become matted and so forth are called ascetics, overcoming contaminated actions and disturbing emotions.
Answer: if pleasure from one's body and possessions increases desire, and pleasure as well as its causes should be avoided, physical and mental pain which increase anger should be avoided too. Why are those who have pleasure not ascetics, and why are the ascetics those who fast and experience the pain that sun and wind inflict on their bodies? Those who overcome contaminated actions and disturbing emotions are called ascetics, not those who torment the body. The supramundane Victor gave certain individuals 12 rules of training to prevent desire. To prevent anger he gave the angry fine food, clothing, and so forth. Therefore only the Sakyas who conquer disturbing emotions should be called ascetics. Just as one gets sugar and so forth by crushing sugar cane, all kinds of happiness in this life and in the future are gained by crushing the disturbing emotions. Having understood how the disturbing emotions function, one must get rid of them. Desire's activity is to acquire both the animate and inanimate. Its antidote is to meditate on repulsiveness and to give up one's circle of friends and one's possessions. Anger's activity is strife and conflict. Cultivating love and using houses and so forth that one likes are its antidote. Just as wind increases the strength of fire and the other elements, confusion's activity is to nurture both desire and anger. Its antidote is meditation on dependent arising and so forth. It is like killing a sea monster with fire.
A sea monster cannot be intimidated by impartiality, hostility, or by generous gifts, but only by punishment. Since its flesh is very sensitive, fire alone is effective. Similarly, desire, anger, and confusion cannot be stopped by acquisition, conflict, and indifference, but only by the fire of wisdom. Swimming around in the water, a sea monster got what he needed for survival. Then one day 2 fishermen arrived. The sea monster turned himself into a human and asked them who they were and what they wanted. They told him they were fishermen and had come to fish. He said, "One of you make the fire and the other can do the cooking. I'll provide the fish, and that way we'll have a good meal without any bother." They agreed and each did his work enthusiastically. Just as the sea monster's task was to catch the fish, desire's activity is to acquire things. One man's task was to cook. Similarly, anger creates conflict, and when there is conflict, unpleasant and abusive words make others boil. Just as the third person's task was to stoke the fire, confusion's function is to feed desire and anger. Assertion: though there are antidotes to the 3 poisons, why should one get rid of them?
Answer: because they produce suffering. Desire produces suffering when one does not encounter what one badly wants. Anger produces suffering when one lacks might to crush the strong. Confusion induces suffering when one fails to understand a subtle matter thoroughly. The inability to recognize these forms of suffering when one is overwhelmed by desire and so forth is great suffering indeed. Therefore, persevere in getting rid of the disturbing emotions. It is like a poor man's son who suffered because he wanted a queen. A certain poor man wanted a queen, but kings keep their queens heavily guarded, and because he could not get her, his desire made him suffer. He felt anger toward the king for guarding his queens well, and since he could not do the slightest harm to the king, he suffered acutely on account of his anger. Blinded by desire and anger, his confusion grew, and unable to understand the situation properly, he was tormented by the suffering it caused him. Question: do anger and desire occur together the way confusion occurs with both of them?
Answer: just as it is seen that bile and phlegm do not occur together. One sees that desire and anger too do not occur simultaneously in manifest form in one mental continuum. Since one has the aspect of longing and the other of aversion, the two must be treated individually. It is like putting fire into a water pot. A fool thought he would mix fire and water and drop some fire into a water pot. Since they are incompatible, the two cannot coexist. By understanding the characteristics of desire and anger and how they function, a spiritual teacher engaged in forming students makes those with desire work like slaves. This is because severity and lack of deference cure desire. The angry should be looked upon as lords. By treating them with indulgence and serving them respectfully, their anger will not arise, thus indulgence cures it. It is like the order in which a washerman trains his donkey. A washerman curbs his donkey's spirit and keeps him busy. Anything capricious the donkey does he considers a fault and beats him hard. Similarly, the wise deliberately keep those habituated to desire busy, and when they do something wrong, make them go on working. When the washerman takes his donkey home, he treats him like a lord and gives him a nosebag of fodder and other things, one after another. Likewise, spiritual guides should treat those habituated to anger like lords.
The antidotes should be applied with an understanding of when disturbing emotions arise. At night, sleep and lethargy increase, and because phlegm predominates, first in the morning there is confusion. In the middle of the day one rides on the wheel of suffering caused by the frustrations of making a living, and anger arises because one is plagued by hunger and thirst. Later, in the evening, when one has recovered from exhaustion and so forth, desire arises. Thus, associated with different forms of physical weakness, the disturbing emotions arise in 3 successive stages during the day, and one must apply their antidotes accordingly with care. It is like the following analogy: when King Jantaka asked a Brahmin questions, the Brahmin felt hostile, but when he was given pots of oil, his greed was aroused. Desire masquerading as a friend deceives ordinary people. Since desire is hard to recognize, you must pay special attention to getting rid of it. Ultimately it produces suffering, so it is not a friend, but looks like one because it seems benevolent. Therefore you do not fear it. Shouldn't people make a particular effort to rid themselves of a harmful friend? Similarly, one should get rid of desire. It is like the following analogy: King Panda shot an arrow at a sage copulating with a doe and, disregarding his curse, died as soon as he had intercourse with a woman.
When King Pandu was out hunting, he heard a sage, who had turned himself into a deer, copulating with a doe. He shot an arrow and hit the sage, who cursed him, saying, "When you have sexual intercourse you will die." Wishing to practice sexual continence, the king gave up his kingdom and went into the forest. One day he saw his queen standing naked, facing the setting sun. He thought, "My queen is so beautiful, she could seduce even the gods." Out of desire he had intercourse with her and died. Never give desire a chance to arise. It arises in 2 ways. Some forms of desire arise from a cause of a similar type created by repeated familiarity in the past. Some arise adventitiously through the circumstance provided by the